I'm sure many of you can relate to this. My family has been sick over the past 2 weeks at least, and we're just passing it around and it won't go away. It's like cold, cough, runny nose, fever, aches and pains, all kinds of fun symptoms. Also, it's about like 15 to 20 degrees here. We have several inches of snow on the ground, so we have just been craving cozy comfort foods, which brings me to what I'm sharing with you today: homemade chicken noodle soup and oatmeal chocolate chip cookies. If you're new to my channel, don't forget to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Let's get cozy. My mother-in-law makes so many delicious homemade soups, so I get my method from her. Basically, you're making a very flavorful broth, starting with chicken thighs, bone-in, skin on. You're gonna get the most flavor out of that. Also, chicken thighs are the most foolproof chicken option, so you really can't overcook them. The meat will always be super tender and just falling off the bone. And then soup recipes are so customizable, so you can add in extra veggies if you want. You can swap out the noodles for rice, kind of make it your own, season it to taste, whatever you're feeling. So you can use this recipe as a base and then build from there your perfect cozy chicken noodle soup. So I started with about 3 pounds of bone-in, skin-on chicken thighs, and I put them in a large pot and covered them by about 1 inch with cold water. Then I started bringing this up to a simmer. In the meantime, I prepared my vegetables. So I peeled and chopped in half a few cloves of garlic, and then I quartered a big white onion. And then I also peeled and chopped up roughly, I think, 3 carrots that I threw in for the broth. But then I also peeled and chopped up the rest of those carrots that you see into coins. And then I added those later on into the soup. Once everything was chopped up, I added it into the water. So here's the quartered onion, the garlic, and the carrots. And to season this, I used a little bit of salt and pepper. I also added in a couple of bay leaves and a sprinkle of dried parsley. Then I stirred everything together and allowed this to simmer for 2 hours. After those 2 hours, I used my spider strainer to remove everything from the pot except for the liquid. So I took out all the chicken, all the vegetables, and just put them off to the side into a bowl to allow the chicken to cool, because eventually you'll peel the skin off and debone that and put the meat back into the broth. Here I'm skimming some of the fat off the surface. You don't have to do this, but I had some time, so I decided to do that. Also, if you're making this ahead of time or if you have leftovers, once this is chilled, that fat will kind of solidify in a layer on top, so you could just remove it then too. So I'm adding into the broth those carrot coins, and I cooked those for about 10 minutes until they had started to soften. And then for the final 10 minutes, I added in my egg noodles. And this was about 8 ounces, I would say, of egg noodles. So while the carrots and noodles were cooking, and once the chicken had cooled so that I could handle it without burning my fingers, I put it on a cutting board, and you can see, look at how just tender and falling apart that is. It's so good using thigh meat here. So I took all the skin off and then took out the bones. I like to take my time with this. There's the one bone in the middle, but there might be some other little bits of bone or cartilage in there. So you just want to make sure that all of those pieces are removed, and then you can just roughly shred the meat by hand, or you could chop it up into more cube-like shapes, whatever you prefer, and then put all the meat back into the soup and just stir it together. You can finish this with another little sprinkling of parsley for a little green garnish, and then your soup is ready to go. One thing I didn't show is that you could add more salt as the soup is cooking. Just taste it and season it to your preference. And if you have leftovers and you're reheating them, you can always add a little extra liquid too. This recipe for oatmeal chocolate chip cookies is so good. In fact, I went to take a little like B-roll footage of all the cookies together on the cooling rack in my kitchen, and they were pretty much all gone. I missed my opportunity because everybody in my family was just gobbling them up. The recipe comes from Preppy Kitchen. I watch his channel here on YouTube. I think he also has a blog, but all of his dessert recipes are top notch. I've tried many and they've all been so good. So the oatmeal chocolate chip cookies are no exception. Let me show you how you make them. These cookies start with 1 stick of room temperature unsalted butter, 2/3 a cup of brown sugar, and 1/3 a cup of white sugar. And then I just used my hand mixer to cream this all together. Next, I added in half a teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, and 1 egg. For the dry ingredients, I measured out 1 cup of all-purpose flour and a half a teaspoon of baking soda, and then mix that together again with my hand mixer. Lastly, I added in 1.5 cups of old-fashioned oats and 1 cup of chocolate chips. And I use these semi-sweet Belgian chocolate squares from Aldi. They're so good. They're really nice quality. They actually melt a little bit when they're baking, so they make the cookies extra kind of ooey and gooey. But at this point, you're going to switch to a rubber spatula to mix everything together, just until it's all incorporated. I scooped these out and refrigerated them for about an hour before baking. These bake at 375 degrees only for about 9 to 10 minutes. They'll start to get golden around the edges. They'll be slightly soft in the center still, but once you remove them, they'll continue to cook for a couple minutes on the baking tray, and then you can remove them to a cooling rack. Now you'll see there I like to drop my cookie sheet onto my stovetop or my countertop. I should probably do my countertop, not my glass stovetop. Just ignore that. But when you drop the pan, it kind of depuffs the cookies a little bit and it makes them a little bit extra chewy. So I actually filmed the soup and the cookies a few days ago, but I'm making another batch of cookies right now because we already ran out of the first batch. I think it only made about 24, and there's 7 of us eating cookies in our family, so it's not that crazy that we went through them in a matter of like 2 days. But anyway, I'm making another batch, and I found caramel chips in my pantry. So I'm using 2/3 of chocolate chips and then 1/3 of the caramel chips. The marketing got me on those because I'm pretty sure they're the same thing as butterscotch chips when I tasted them, but they're really good. They're gonna be so good in these cookies. And I'm going to just put these right in the oven. I'm not gonna refrigerate them beforehand, so I'll show you how they look after they bake. These are the cookies without refrigerating the dough first. You can see they spread a little bit more, but not that much more. Part of the idea of refrigerating the dough too is to allow the flavors to kind of meld together a little bit more. So if you have the time, you can do that. But if not, they turn out just fine. These cookies are so good. 10 out of 10, maybe 11 out of 10. Thank you so much for joining me here today in my kitchen. And if you're under the weather, feel better soon.